I worked with steel for 38 years. Not the glamorous kind, not bridges or skyscrapers. Structural fabrication, the kind of work where you spend 8 hours a day in a shop that smells like grinding dust and machine oil, where your hands are never fully clean, no matter how long you scrub them at the end of a shift. I started as a helper at 22, sweeping shavings off the floor and handing tools to men who barely acknowledged I existed. By the time I was 40, I was running the floor. By 55, I owned a 30% stake in the company. I know metal. I know when a weld looks right on the surface but has air pockets underneath. I know when something is holding weight it wasn't designed to carry. I know the difference between a crack that's been there a long time and one that happened fast. I wish I had known how to read the same signs in a family. My name is not important. What happened to me, that is. I married my wife, Loretta. No, wait. The list. Let me think of another name. I married Sylvia 31 years ago. She was a dental hygienist, quiet, organized, the kind of woman who kept a planner on the kitchen counter and wrote down grocery lists in neat block letters. I was not a romantic man. I didn't bring flowers unless I'd forgotten something. But I worked. God, I worked. Everything we had. The house in Claremont, the lake property in Michigan, the retirement accounts, the vehicles. All of it came from me getting up at 5 in the morning and not stopping until the job was done. We had one daughter, Naomi. Naomi is sharp. She got her mother's precision and my stubbornness, which is a combination that works well in certain environments and terribly in others. She was good in school, good at getting what she wanted, good at getting what she wanted, good at making people feel like disagreeing with her was the wrong choice. I was proud of her. For a long time, I was very proud of her. She married a man named Preston Golt when she was 28. He sold medical devices, the kind that hospitals buy in bulk, the kind that requires a lot of lunches and golf games and client dinners. He made decent money. He also spent decent money, which is a different thing entirely. He drove a truck that cost more than my first house. He wore a watch that he mentioned the price of within 20 minutes of meeting you, not by bragging directly, but by referencing it sideways. Yeah, I had to get it serviced last month. Cost me almost as much as the watch itself, which, wasn't cheap to begin with. That kind of man. I did not trust Preston Gold from the first year. But Naomi loved him, and Sylvia thought he was charming, and I was a man who had learned to keep his mouth shut about things he couldn't prove. The first time they needed money, Naomi was 30. They'd overextended on a condo, bought it during a good stretch for Preston's commissions, and then the commissions dried up, the way they always do for men who spend more time at lunch than in the office. They needed $40,000. Sylvia asked me to help. I wrote the check. The second time, Preston had an idea for a side business, some kind of supplement distribution thing that I knew from the first sentence was going nowhere. I said no that time. Preston smiled tightly at Thanksgiving and said he understood. He did not look like he understood. The third time, Naomi called me on a Tuesday morning in October and said their property taxes were overdue and they were going to lose the house. I won't lie to you. I hesitated, but I sent the money. Because it was my daughter. Because I kept thinking about the little girl who used to sit on my workbench and hand me bolts while I tinkered with the truck on Saturdays. You try to hold on to that. You try to hold on to who they were before the person they became. I should back up. 2 years before any of this came to a head, my health started giving me signals, the kind that a man who grew up working class learns to ignore. Fatigue, shortness of breath on stairs, a tightness in the chest that came and went, usually after stress. My GP referred me to a cardiologist. The cardiologist used the word significant when describing the blockage. He scheduled a procedure. I told Sylvia. She said, "Let me know when to take you to the appointment." She did not ask how I felt. She did not look up from the tablet she was reading. I noticed that. I filed it away. Here is something nobody tells you about a long marriage that has gone cold. You stop knowing when it changed. You can't find the moment. You look back and there are years of what looked like normal life. Dinners, vacations, ordinary Sundays, and somewhere in there the warmth just drained out quietly. The way a slow leak works. And by the time you notice, you're already empty. Preston's 40th birthday was in September. Naomi had been planning it for 6 months. A weekend at the lodge up in Wisconsin, rented the whole place. 30-some guests, catered food, an open bar, a bluegrass band Saturday night. She asked me to contribute to the cost. I declined, politely. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Sylvia thought I should have contributed. My procedure was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday of September, same weekend as the lodge party. I had told both of them. Told Sylvia twice. Told Naomi when she called to confirm I wasn't coming to the party. Dad, it's just a procedure. You said it's routine. I said the cardiologist had used the word routine as a relative term, and that I would like her to be reachable. She said she would have her phone on her. She did not have her phone on her. She did not have her phone on her. Friday evening, I drove myself to the hospital. Sylvia had gone up to Wisconsin that morning with Naomi and Preston and the rest of them. I had told her it was fine. I told myself it was fine. I sat in the pre-op room in a gown that didn't close properly in the back, watching a TV mounted in the corner with the volume too low to hear. And I thought about the steel shop and the way a weld looks when it's done right. Solid all the way through. No gaps. The procedure did not go as planned. I don't have a medical way to explain it. What the cardiologist told me afterward was that there had been a complication during the stent placement. My artery had gone into spasm. My heart had effectively stopped for a period of time, and they had worked on me for 40 minutes before things stabilized. He said I was lucky. He used that word several times. Lucky. I was in the ICU when they tried to reach my family. My nurse, a woman named Deb who had the no-nonsense manner of someone who has seen everything and decided to find it mostly funny. She told me later what happened. She called Sylvia's phone. Sylvia picked up. There was music in the background, voices, the sound of a party in full swing. Deb explained what had happened. She said my condition had been serious and that family should consider coming to the hospital. Sylvia said, "Is he stable now?" Deb said yes, he's stable. But it was a significant event, and Sylvia said, "Then we'll come tomorrow. It's a long drive tonight, and we've all been drinking." Deb told me this with a neutral face, the way medical professionals learn to deliver terrible information. I looked at the ceiling for a while after she left the room. They did not come Saturday night. They did not come Saturday night. Sunday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, Naomi sent me a text message. It said, "Hope you're feeling better, Dad. We'll head down after checkout, probably get there around 6. I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about checkout. I thought about the fact that they were waiting until the lodge kicked them out before they came to see me. I thought about $40,000 in property taxes and Preston's smile at Thanksgiving. I thought about 38 years of getting up before dawn and coming home with hands that never fully came clean. And something in me went very quiet. Not angry. Not sad. Quiet. The way a shop goes quiet after you shut down all the machines at the end of a long day. Just still. I asked Deb if I could use a phone. She brought me one. I called my attorney, a man named Covington I'd been using for business matters for 15 years. He answered because I had his personal cell number, and because we had an understanding that if I called on a weekend, it was not casual. I told him I needed to begin a process. He asked me what kind. I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You sure?" I said I'd never been more sure of anything structural in my life. Covington is a careful man. He doesn't move fast, but he moves correctly. Over the next 3 weeks, while I was supposed to be recovering, sitting in the recliner, taking medications on a schedule, not lifting anything heavier than a coffee mug. I was on the phone with him for an hour every day. I reviewed documents he emailed. I signed things. I made decisions with a kind of cold clarity that I think only comes when you have actually considered your own mortality and found, on the other side of that consideration, that the people who were supposed to care about you were waiting for checkout. What I had, the house in Claremont, in my name, paid off. The lake property in Michigan, in my name. The investment accounts, in my name. Sylvia had access but was not a co-owner in a way that complicated a separation. A joint checking account that I moved carefully, legally, in stages. A will that had been leaving everything to Sylvia and Naomi in equal portions. That will no longer said what it used to say. I want to be clear about something. I did not do this out of spite. I've thought about this carefully. I thought about it in the ICU, and I thought about it in the recliner, and I think about it still. Spite is hot. What I felt was cold. What I felt was the recognition that I had been operating on a set of assumptions, that my family loved me, that my sacrifice was noted, that I would not have to spend my final years being managed and extracted, and those assumptions had been tested and failed. Catastrophically. And when a structural assumption fails, you do not patch it. You redesign from the ground up. They came to the house in October. Naomi called first, said she and Preston wanted to sit down and talk things through. I said, fine. Come Sunday. They came. Sylvia was already there. We had been living in the same house, but in a way that I think both of us knew was temporary. She had the look of someone who had been coached on what to say. Naomi sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me she loved me and that the weekend had been a terrible mistake and that she would regret it forever. Preston sat next to her with his hands folded and said nothing, which was the most honest thing he had done in years. I let Naomi finish. Then I said I appreciated her saying that. Then I told them what I had done. The house was already listed. I had arranged to move my things to a furnished apartment in town, temporarily, while I decided on something more permanent. The lake property had been put into a trust that bypassed them both entirely, designated for a conservation organization that works with the land up there. The will had been revised. The joint account had been restructured. Naomi looked like I had struck her. Preston looked like a man watching his investment go to zero on a screen he couldn't turn off. Sylvia looked, for just a moment, like she was going to cry. And for that one moment, I almost let myself feel something softer. But then I remembered Deb's voice telling me the story, neutral and careful, and I remembered that I had been alone in a hospital with my heart stopped and the people who were supposed to come had waited for checkout. I told them they were welcome to challenge the changes through proper legal channels and that Covington would respond to any correspondence. Then I stood up and I went to my room and I let them sit there. The house sold in 22 days. I am in Colorado now, near a town small enough that nobody knows the story, big enough to have a decent hardware store. I have a house with a workshop in the back, the kind I always wanted. I have a dog, a cattle mix who showed up at the pound with no history, which I found relatable. I wake up when I want to. I go to bed when I'm tired. My chest doesn't feel like it has a stone in it anymore, and I am talking about more than the cardiology. Naomi calls occasionally. I answer sometimes. We are working towards something that I can't yet name. Not forgiveness, exactly, not the old warmth either. Something more honest than both. Something that doesn't require me to pretend the weekend in Wisconsin didn't happen. Preston no longer calls. That part I don't find complicated at all. Covington sent me a card at Christmas. He wrote in a spare attorney's handwriting, "You did the right thing, not the easy thing." The right thing. I have it on the wall above the workbench. I know the difference between a crack that's decorative and one that goes all the way through. When something fails at the foundation, you don't grieve the building. You clear the rubble. You start over on solid ground. That is what I did. That is what I am still doing. I've been asked, since all this happened, whether I regret it. People want the answer to be yes. They want me to say I acted out of anger, that I went too far, that somewhere in a quiet moment, I wished I had done things differently. It would make them more comfortable. It would fit the shape of the story they expect. The honest answer is no. And I have spent enough time examining that answer to trust it. What happened to me in that hospital was not the beginning of the problem. That is the thing people miss when they hear the story. They focus on the weekend in Wisconsin, on Sylvia's voice telling the nurse she'd rather not be disturbed, on my son-in-law Preston sitting at my kitchen table with his hands folded and nothing to say. They treat those things as the cause. They weren't the cause. They were the revelation. There is a difference, and the difference matters. For years I had been making the same error that a lot of men my age make. I confused providing with being valued. I wrote checks and I showed up for work and I kept the accounts in order. And I told myself that all of that was being seen, being appreciated, that it was building something between me and the people I loved. What I was actually doing was funding a relationship that had already decided I was a resource, not a person. I just didn't have the evidence yet to know it. The cardiac event gave me the evidence. Not by breaking my heart, that's too clean a way to say it. They gave me the evidence by removing the noise. When you are alone in an ICU and your heart has just been restarted and the nurse is telling you in her careful, neutral voice that your family decided the drive was too long, something in you gets very quiet and very clear. The stories you have been telling yourself about how they're just busy, about how they love you in their way, about how things will get better. Those stories don't survive that kind of quiet. That clarity is what I acted from. Not rage, not spite. Clarity. And here is what I know to be true. Not from any philosophy or tradition, just from 63 years of watching how things actually work. The way you treat people compounds over time in both directions. Naomi and Preston had been making small withdrawals for years. Not just financial ones, though those were real enough. Withdrawals of presence, of consideration, of basic human regard. And those things accumulate a debt that eventually comes due. Not because someone is keeping score, because that is simply what happens when you take more than you give for long enough. The structure weakens. One day it fails. I was not their punishment. I was just the man who stopped pretending the structure was sound. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes their own life in this, and I know some of you do because you have lived some version of these years, is that the hardest thing is not the decision. The hardest thing is the period before the decision, when you already know what is true but you are still hoping you are wrong. That hope is not weakness. It is love, in a form that has not yet accepted what it is looking at. When you finally accept it, you will know. It feels less like breaking and more like setting something down that you have been carrying too long. Your hands hurt, but they are free. I am in Colorado. I have a workshop and a dog, and mornings that belong to me. Naomi and I are still finding our way towards something. Slowly and carefully, the way you move through a space when you are not sure the floor will hold. Maybe it will. I am not closing that door. But I am done building on a cracked foundation. Whatever comes next, it will be built solid, all the way through.